86 carats.
Where?
London.
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 London?
Yes, London. You know, fish, chips, cup of tea, bad food, worse weather, Mary fucking Poppins, London.
You got that, London. Hey, we're on!
Snatch. A film often remembered and looked at for its strange but defining charisma, Brad Pitt's unintelligible accent, and a wide range of personalities that all come crashing together to finish a story told with soul and entertainment. But Snatch is a film that captures an interesting cultural phenomenon and time in British history. Thatcher and Major's neoliberal governments had come and passed, and as the UK moved on from neoliberalism to New Labour, culture started changing too. New forms of masculinity found themselves emerging too, through magazine media like Gentleman's Quarterly or Loaded, to music like Blur and Oasis. Masculinities were now multiple, malleable, and more complex than they ever were before. The British 90s found itself in the era of the new lad. Guy Ritchie's narratives of masculinity, crime, and action, caricaturing the masculinities of old, criminal, alternative British identities, find themselves influenced by, and in turn influenced, new lad culture of the 90s through Ritchie's representations and sensibility regarding masculine narratives of the time. So how do we understand the influence of the new lad on Ritchie's representation of old criminal masculinities? First, we have to understand Ritchie and the new lad. Masculinities of 90s Britain find themselves constructed in a post-feminist context, which makes them complex and often contradictory, meaning they change between progressive and reactionary gender and cultural politics. The new lad takes these complexions and contradictions to their height. Essentially, the new lad is a mix of the performative discourses of new, feminized, deindustrialized, but commercialized masculinities of the 90s metrosexual, combined with a brash, bold, and provocative traditional masculinity created by and influenced by nostalgia of working-class masculinities that now found themselves disempowered after the industrial decline caused by British neoliberalism. Ritchie's first features address the new lad and represent a relation and power structures between different masculinities that each group represents respectively. Lock, Stock shows two representations of the new lad, like the perpetually stoned, white, upper-class, private school weed growers, who are caricatured as such to show their appropriation of class and culture in a ridiculous light. A more serious representation of this new, complex masculinity would be Lock, Stock's main characters, working-class, small-time crooks who try to bend the system established by the criminal masculinities of old, only to find themselves having to emulate these older criminal masculinities to beat them.
Guns for show, nice for a pro.
Snatch shows the complexities of the new generation of criminal masculinities by pairing Turkish and Tommy together. Turkish being the witty, stoic boxing promoter, while Tommy tries to play the tough guy, mostly unsuccessfully. The juxtaposition of these two characters paired with each other paints an insightful look into these newer masculinities, and reveals a new lad sensibility from Ritchie in his writing of these characters, their contradictions, and their complexities. Ritchie's work to contextualize these new British masculinities shows and caricatures alternative British identities, which in this case translates to older criminal masculinities that were the alternative to normal, polite British identity, imagined by successive governments like the Major government of the early 90s. Extra-textually, he does this by casting working-class actors with strong vernacular and accents, like Lenny McLean, a former bare-knuckle boxer and infamously the hardest man in Britain, cast as Barry the Baptist, or ex-footballer Vinnie Jones and Alan Ford as Bricktop in Snatch. Bricktop's character is also portrayed as the old-style East End gangster, staying true to British post-war criminals in the way that he is not shown as a criminal after glory, sticking to unlicensed boxing and betting, and keeping his self-interest at heart. By representing several masculinities, Ritchie creates hierarchy and overlap between these masculinities. This creates a hierarchy in masculinities, and both Snatch and Lockstock's stories represent a hybridity of the protagonist's masculinities that end up involuntarily changing these hierarchies. Snatch shows these hierarchies overtly. Sol and Vince's pawn shop have CCTV camera monitors in their shop which frequently show the movement of characters in and out of rooms, but also show their fear of other, stronger criminals taking interest in their criminal activities. Lockstock establishes this hierarchy through the poker scene, in which gang boss Hatchet Harry and his right-hand man Barry the Baptist know Eddie may win the match of cards, so they cheat and put Eddie and his friends into a larger debt than before. This shows a certain reflection of the idea of old masculinity in crisis. Snatch and Lockstock's old criminal masculinities are also fighting a new masculinity that at the end of both films replaces them as the hegemons. Ritchie's comic book-like caricature of all of his characters, for example by introducing Snatch's characters in one comic book/music video inspired sequence for example, shows Guy Ritchie's new lad attitude to representations of male narratives. This caricature essentially makes these masculinities both comical, but also retain a certain coolness attached to them. And the violence that the older hegemonic masculinities use is often turned against themselves by new masculinities, who appropriate rather than imitate their actions.
You saying I can't shoot? Oh no, Tommy. I wasn't saying you can't shoot. I know you can't shoot.
What Ritchie shows is essentially the construction of new masculinities through the sensibilities of the new lad within narratives of crime and comedy. This reflects a general brashness of the new lad and a regression of female representation at the time, and increasing complexities of a type of masculinity that is a melting pot of the masculinities of old with the masculinities of new by representing both as caricatures and by representing both in power struggles for their hegemony. More importantly, Guy Ritchie's narratives of masculinities show that they influence each other and thus become complex and often contradictory, influencing the performance of new British masculinities, including the new lad. What we end up with is a reflection of how Guy Ritchie takes in the old to create the new over his two debut films, reflecting not only masculinities of the time, but also the changing British film industry, politics, and media of the time.
Thank you very much.